I never imagined waking up to 3 bulldozers blocking my driveway, or seeing Karen, the HOA president, smirking behind them. They had no clue who they were dealing with, or that I owned the very ground they stood on. What would you do if you found out your irritating HOA wasn't just harassing you illegally, but also siphoning thousands from your neighbors? I still recall the day it all shifted. The morning sun warmed my shoulders as I knelt in the soft earth along my driveway, planting my final cucumber seedlings. After 15 years of grueling 80-hour weeks at my law firm, I'd found solace in gardening. The feel of dirt under my nails and the promise of fresh produce kept me grounded. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing?" I looked up to see Karen Thompson standing at the edge of my property, arms crossed over her tailored jacket, her sleek brunette bob unmoving in the wind, her mouth a tight, judgmental line. "Morning, Karen," I said, brushing my hands on my gardening apron. "Just adding to my veggie patch." Her eyes narrowed as she scanned the tidy rows of raised beds lining my driveway. "This is unacceptable, Michael. Front yards in Pinewood Heights must be landscaped with approved plants only. Vegetable gardens belong in the back, out of sight." I took a steadying breath. Karen had ruled our HOA for 5 years, turning our once welcoming neighborhood into a minefield of trivial regulations and unexpected fines. "Karen, my deed predates the HOA by 30 years. I've got grandfathered exemptions for most of these rules." I stood, suddenly conscious of my soil-streaked jeans next to her pristine outfit. "That's not how it works," she snapped, pulling out her phone. "I'm documenting this violation. The board will hear about it immediately." She snapped photos, her fingers darting across the screen. 2 neighbors walking their dogs paused to watch. "I've read the HOA agreement cover to cover," I said evenly. "I've got records of the old board recognizing my exemptions. Want to see them?" She waved me off. "Save it for the hearing. You'll get a formal notice by tomorrow. I suggest you clear out this," she gestured at my garden, "mess before the fines pile up." As she stormed off, Mr. Carter from across the street shot me a pitying glance. He'd clashed with Karen last month over his mailbox shade. Apparently, emerald didn't match the approved pine. That night, a neon yellow violation notice appeared on my door. $50 daily fine until the unauthorized agricultural activity was gone. The hearing was set for next week. I filed it under HOA garbage, but this felt different, more deliberate. Then my phone rang. "Michael, dear," came Mrs. Lillian Harper's shaky voice. The kind 80-year-old had lived nearby since before the neighborhood existed. "I saw Karen bothering you today. You're not the first. Last month, she fined the Petersons $500 because their son's wheelchair ramp clashed with the neighborhood aesthetic." My jaw clenched. "That can't be legal." "It's not," Lillian confirmed. "But they couldn't afford a fight. They paid and repainted. Karen's gotten worse since her buddy David joined as HOA counsel." I thanked her and hung up, sleep eluding me. The next morning, I dug into research before work. My family had owned this land before selling to developers in the 70s. Dad once mentioned retaining rights, but I'd never cared, until now. I was rifling through attic boxes when I heard rumbling outside. Peering through my window, I froze. 3 bulldozers blocked my driveway. Karen stood beside them in a sharp blazer, next to a tall man in a suit I didn't know. Neighbors gawked from the sidewalk. Heart racing, I grabbed my phone and HOA files. Whatever Karen was up to, she'd just overplayed her hand. I stepped onto my porch as her triumphant grin chilled me. "Michael Sullivan," she announced loudly. "The board held an emergency meeting last night. Your violations are so egregious, we've authorized immediate action." The man beside her spoke up. "I'm David Reed, legal counsel for Pinewood Heights HOA. These," he waved at my garden, "unauthorized structures are being removed under Section 8.3 of the bylaws. Immediate remedy for public nuisance." Neighbors stared in silence. Mrs. Patel gasped. The Wilson kids stopped their bikes. I walked down my steps, mind spinning. I needed time. "Mr. Reed," I said calmly, "you might want to double-check your legal ground. Those aren't structures, they're temporary beds. And you're about to make a costly mistake." David's smirk flickered. "Your threats don't scare us, Mr. Sullivan. We have full HOA authority." Karen beamed. "Michael, just agree to remove these eyesores and pay the $300 in fines, and we can move on." The bulldozers revved. The nearest operator looked uneasy, glancing between us. Before you start, I said, I'm recording this, and my associate from the firm is on her way. Oh, and there's something else about this property you should know. Karen rolled her eyes. Spare us the legal nonsense, Michael. Just then, a sheriff's cruiser rolled up, followed by a woman with county records. Karen's smugness wavered. What's this? She demanded. We don't need police for an HOA matter. I smiled faintly. Karen, you don't realize whose driveway you've blocked, or whose land those bulldozers are on. County Clerk MS. Grayson spread old maps across the sheriff's hood as neighbors edged closer. These are 1973 survey records, she said, pointing to faded lines, and the sale agreement between the Sullivan family and Pinewood Development. Karen shoved forward. This is absurd. No ancient papers override our HOA. Sheriff Daniels cleared his throat. Ma'am, you'd better listen. MS. Grayson continued. The Sullivans kept mineral rights under the 200-acre development, utility easements under main roads, and exemptions from future HOAs for 5 family properties, including Michael's house. David fumbled with his briefcase. Impossible. The HOA covenant covers all properties. The covenant started in 1995, MS. Grayson said. These agreements were filed in 1973. Your rules don't supersede them. Karen's face reddened. Even if his house is exempt, he can't flout community standards. Actually, Sheriff Daniels cut in. County law says he can do what he wants here, so long as it's zoned residential. Gardens are fine. The crowd grew. Mr. Carter filmed on his phone. Karen barked at the operators. Proceed anyway. The lead driver shook his head. Not without a court order, ma'am. I'll get one today, she spat. I stepped closer, voice low. Those bulldozers are on my easement. That's trespassing. And since you brought them to destroy my property, I let it hang. David whispered to Karen, her eyes widening. Sheriff, I said, I'd like to report attempted property damage and trespassing. We'll handle it, Daniels replied. This is outrageous. Karen shouted. The HOA's run this place for decades. It's not new, came Lillian's frail voice. She hobbled forward with her cane. Some of us knew about the Sullivan exemptions. The old board honored them, but you didn't. Karen glared. Stay out of this, Lillian. Your holiday lights hearing is next week. Gasps rippled through the crowd at her threat. Lillian smiled. Oh, I remember plenty, like your husband's shed crossing the Miller line, and David letting it slide. Neighbors murmured. David checked his watch. Karen, we should regroup privately. No hearing, I said. My property's exempt. Move those bulldozers, or I'll add charges. Sheriff Daniels stepped in. Let's keep this calm. MS. Thompson, Mr. Reed, get that equipment off his easement. Karen glared, defeated, as the bulldozers retreated. Lillian touched my arm. Come by tonight, Michael. Bring those documents. There's more about the HOA finances. As Karen and David sped off, fear flashed in their eyes. Whatever they'd hoped to bury with my garden, they'd unleash something bigger. That evening, Lillian handed me a folder. Bank statements showed the HOA collecting $300 monthly from each home for a pool upgrade. That never happened. $300,000 vanished. Transfers led to Thompson Reed Consulting, owned by Karen and David. How'd you find this? I asked. My husband was an accountant, Lillian said. After they fined me for my lights, I dug into the HOA reports no one reads. The last page revealed their plan. Force 5 elderly homeowners to sell cheap, buy via their company, and flip for profit. They target people who can't fight, Lillian whispered. Sheriff Daniels, listening, said, this is fraud. That night, I called a neighborhood meeting. The clubhouse overflowed as I projected the evidence. They stole $300,000 meant for our pool, roads, playground, I said. Anger erupted when I showed their scheme against seniors. Where are they? Someone yelled. Invited but absent, I replied. Mr. Carter, a retired judge, stood. I move we dissolve the board and elect interim leaders. The vote was unanimous, 76 hands up. My phone buzzed. Karen, you've ruined everything, she hissed. You think you've won because your family owns some dirt. It's about right, not winning, I said. She hung up. Then a text. Check your cameras. Live feed showed Karen and David yanking up my plants. Karen smirking at the lens before slashing her throat with her finger. Another text, just the beginning. I woke to shattered glass, my kitchen window, and my garden trashed. Cameras caught Karen and David at 3 a.m. I texted Lillian. By noon, news vans swarmed. Neighbors arrived with plants and shovels. "We're with you," said Mrs. Carter, once fined for her bird feeder. Sheriff Daniels brought news. Karen and David are arrested. County found $300,000 missing. We voted for a friendly neighbors group, with fair rules, gardens allowed. 2 months later, we partied in Karen's old yard, now sold. Lillian handed me a cucumber. "You changed everything." I grinned. "I just wanted to grow my veggies in peace."